before.
Good morning, class. You're watching The Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic. Homeroom is on Rumble. You just go to Rumble, search the channels for The Road to Concord. It's one word. When you find it, you go ahead and you click follow. It might mean you gotta set up an account, but it's fast, easy, free, and I did it, so you can too. For those technologically challenged members of class, you can also catch us on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, X, Candy Bar, Snickers. Then you can catch the podcast after the show. It's uploaded to Podbean, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and BitChute when it works. Just look for The Road to Concord. You can go to the blog page. That's theroadtoconcord.com. That's where you find all your show notes, study notes, and handouts for the class. Finally, you can email the professor at joe@theroadtoconcord.com. He's a little slow, but I think he's been doing all right so far with the email.
No, I owe somebody a reply to an email from last night, so I'm a little out of it.
So he is being a little slow again. All righty. Yep. Well, at least he's being honest. Anyway, he'll get to y'all eventually. If you find our classes helpful, please click the thumbs up, like, follow, subscribe, etc., and share it with those you think could benefit from it. If you think what we're doing is worthwhile, or you just have some extra money to throw around, just feel free to donate. Just about $5, cup of coffee, couple Slim Jims, whatever you want to do. We completely run on donations because nobody would pay us to do this otherwise. And I can't say I blame them. When you do share the show, however, warn those poor souls. Just warn their poor little pea-picking hearts that Joe is an acquired taste. And we mean it.
If you're kind of new to the show, Charlene is that's Natasha on the show is her stage name, and she's playing Charlene because she's imitating Charlie, and neither of them is a hick. It's just hopefully for the for the left-leaning members of the audience, they're playing a role. It's a skit. It's just meant to be fun, but it actually I like it. It kind of works on this show. Little levity of humor there. Sorry, I'm like, what? Yeah. AI humor. Beep boop. Okay, folks, welcome to the Road to Concord. It's Founders Friday, also known as Fallacy Friday, where we teach logic and the founding fathers, the founding ideals and principles of the United States of America, according to the way the founding fathers, or at least the best we can ascertain, the way they understood the world and wanted things to be done. We're going to start something a little different today. This is going to be the first day of a slight change. Some of you may not notice any difference at all, but it is definitely different in my mind and hopefully in the way I present things. What I normally do with you is you tune in and I open the fire hose and you open your mouth and I feed you from a fire hose and you get to swallow a few gulps here and there while you're trying not to drown in the fire hose. And I don't know that that is always as beneficial as I wish it would be. And that's one of my limitations. It's part of why we say I'm an acquired taste. I'm going to try and slow things down and teaching more digestible nibbles. It might mean that we have to stretch out some of our studies a little longer than what I normally would do, but I want you to be able to digest it. And I want it to become part of your daily, your understanding of the world and in the way you work and live and operate within our world, especially in the United States of America, but also in the Western world. So what I'm going to do is start focusing a little less on the day-to-day hysteria that's in our headlines in the media and in the world. You got plenty of talking heads that'll do that for you out there in the blogosphere and the radio and TV. We try not to do that. Now, all those little talking heads, Rush would tell you it was infotainment. Bongino calls it infotainment. All those people say that they're there to entertain you and inform you at the same time. It's been my experience that they don't. They lull us to sleep and they tell us things, but what they're doing is their own form of programming. I don't know whether or not they intend it to be that way, but it seems to be that that's what they do. I want to always educate, even if you disagree with me. I don't, personally, I never want to trample on another person's free will. I share how I understand things, how I see them, how I understand them at the time I share them. I offer you how I got there, what my thinking is, my understanding of logic and reason, the history, the research I've done. I explain it all, and I invite you to decide for yourself. And you need to check behind a lot of these things. Well, on our quote-unquote right-wing conservative media, they don't do that. They might provide you some of the sources, but very seldom do they ask you to go do the homework, for yourself. Some of them do. Some of them are a little better at it, but I want to constantly make that a refrain here. So we're going to change things up just a little bit. And hopefully if I do what I'm trying to do, long-term class members, the only thing you'll really notice is that I've slowed down a bit. I'm taking things a little slower. Now I am going to, it's Founding Fathers Friday. We're going to get to that. I am not going to totally abandon what's going on in the world, especially since I can tie a lot of it to what we're doing on the shows on Friday. Today, we're going to start on a look at the judiciary and what the Founding Fathers, how they handled the judiciary, what they thought of it, and how they tried to handle it. We've got a comment on the board from Aaron Spikes, and it says, "Who saw the blood moon this morning?" I did, and did a lot of thinking about what it meant. That's a Wednesday show, brother. But I get you. I understand. The sun and the eclipses talk to the Gentile world. The moon talks to Yahweh's people. I get it. I understand. But it kind of goes hand in hand with what we are talking about, though, Aaron, in a way. It's a warning about lawlessness, or at least I think it is. Not just Yahweh's lawlessness, but our lawlessness. And that goes hand in hand with where we're at with the judiciary. I don't know if you're paying attention to the news as of late, but the left is... I'm not happy with the political left. And I'm not talking about just Democrats. I'm talking about ideology. They're calling for violence. They're talking in terms of resistance. Excuse me. It's springtime. Allergies are the yellow rain or the yellow dew is starting to show up here. And if you don't know what I mean, you've never lived in the pine forests. This time of year, pollen is everywhere. It's starting to show up here where I live. Okay, the left is calling, they're talking in terms of resistance and, we've got to fight Trump, be ready to die in the streets, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this is stuff that has been said by left-wing talking heads. I saved the stories. I can provide the receipts. If anybody wants them, email me. I'll send the stories to you. This is the language they're using. And they're calling for violence. They're telling people to be violent. Now, folks, if you go to the U.S. Code and you look up sedition, that is an act of sedition. January 6th was not. What the political left is doing now is they're also encouraging what we would call domestic terrorism. Terrorism, by definition, is anything that causes that when your actions are intended to scare or frighten or quote unquote terrorize people into submitting to your political will, your political aims, agenda, or desires, that's terrorism. So if I'm burning down Tesla dealerships because I want Elon Musk and Doge to quit doing their work, that is terrorism. And if you are funding it, that is an insurrection. This is the legal definition. And this is part of what we're dealing with. And this is what we're going to start to explain, explain, and try to understand today. And it'll run for several shows. I don't know how fast we'll get through it. You will only get out of these next series of shows on Fridays what you put into it. I have literal homework for you to do this time, and I'm going to do it in little bites. But we have death threats from the left. And I don't know if you've been paying attention, but we now have swatting. Now, for those of you who do not know what this is when you call in a fake police report. My neighbor's trying to kill his wife. He's got a gun and a knife, and he's yelling he's going to shoot anybody that comes on the property. And you give them an address, and the police come storming in to save this poor woman. And what the hope is they'll end up shooting the person you're mad at in the process. Murder by cop is what this is. They call it swatting because you're supposed to call in a report bad enough to get the SWAT team to show up. People have been killed this way. Got a comment on the board from Deltros1. Says our silence is violence. Their violence is speech. Yes, our silence to this is a form of violence. Yes, very good. There is no middle road in this today. I'm not talking about political left-right. I'm talking about spiritual left-right. And it does align with your political left-right. Okay? They go hand in hand on earth as it is in heaven. The way we act here is a reflection of our spiritual alignment. So the left is getting out of hand. And the media and the Democratic Party have culpability in this. If they were responsible, they would be telling their supporters, hey, whoa, you don't do this. Yes, we lost an election. Yes, we don't like what he's doing, but elections have consequences. Hasn't the left told the right that before? But that's not what they do. They throw temper tantrums and they go absolutely nuts. That's lawlessness. That is not only the biblical definition of lawlessness, that's the legal definition of lawlessness. Lawlessness, the president of the United States is the top executive of this nation, this federation. His job is to shut down lawlessness, to enforce the laws of the United States. And the laws are written to have an orderly, civil, functioning society. These things he should be trying to stop. They go crazy whenever he tries to stop them. It's also the bureaucratic government is lawless. And that will probably be where we turn next, because it will flow naturally from our study of the judiciary. But where I want to go today, what I want to do first to start off with here, I want to share just a few stories with you. I'm getting a lot of them from the Gateway Pundit. Yes, I know. It's a right-wing rag, Joe. I don't want to pay attention. Most of what the Gateway Pundit does, yes, it's right-leaning. Yes, politically right. But what it does is what Breitbart used to do. It just collects stories from all over the internet. Yes, they add their own editorial. But that doesn't mean that the information is wrong, because a lot of times they quote CNN, folks. And if the Gateway Pundit is going to quote the Communist News Network, it's really hard to say that they are only a right-wing source, because they also quote MSNBC, their stories. Yes, they add their commentary to it, but that's what they're doing. They're feeding their audience. So this one here says, Trump signs executive order cracking down on radical activist judges and far-left groups abusing the courts. Demands to pay that the court costs be paid for. He's trying to stop frivolous lawsuits. This is not exactly where I wanted to start this series here, but we'll come back to that. This is where I wanted to start. Judicial insurrection. Radical leftist judges wage all-out war against President Trump. 119 legal challenges in just 2 months. More than double any president in history. And that's any presidential administration in history. This is lawfare. This is an abuse of the court system. This is exactly what the Anti-Federalists told the country was going to happen with the courts. We're going to get to them today. I'm going to introduce you to them a little bit. They are the most important of our founding fathers. They're the reason you have the Bill of Rights. If it hadn't been for the Anti-Federalists, you'd live under an open tyranny today. But what we have now is a bunch of judges that in some cases aren't even waiting for a case to be filed. They're taking this action on their own. That is illegal, according to the Constitution and our system of law that we've inherited from the British, the common law system. We will get to all of this in due time. Here's another story. This one's from a place called Constitutional Rights Pat. Federal judge orders Elon Musk and Doge to reveal plans to downsize government, identify all employees. What if a right-leaning judge were to have turned around and said, Obama, I order your administration to give us all your political plans for what you plan to do in the next, few months. And you have to identify everybody who's working for you so that we can dox them, publish their names, their addresses, and let the whole world know who they are and where they live and what they do, so that we can target them and terrorize them and try to force them into stopping what they're doing. You would never seen a right-wing judge issue that order because it's lawless. Plus, the judiciary doesn't have the authority to tell the president that. Well, the judiciary doesn't have the authority to issue this order either. This is a lawless order. They don't have the authority to dictate to the executive what to do and how to do it. Another story on Gateway Pundit. Breaking. Radical Clinton judge blasts the Trump administration. Orders the government to rehire thousands of fired probationary employees in 6 federal agencies. Well, one, they were probationary employees. Almost any company in this country, if you're a probationary, you can be fired for any reason whatsoever. Just period. So I don't understand this. But where were these judges when Obama was firing people in wholesale fashion? When Biden fired all of Trump's people when he took over? Where were they when W did some of it? Where were they when Clinton fired over 300,000 people when he took into office? Where were they? The right complained about the Clintons firing everybody in the travel office of the White House and putting their cronies in there. It was nepotism. But nobody came to file cases against that. Nobody did that. It's because that's not the way our system's supposed to work. But the left doesn't care about the law. The left only cares about power. President Trump is trying to dismantle their power. So the left is going crazy. And all the stories I'm seeing, left-wing, right-wing judges. If you're a left-wing or right-wing judge, you're not a judge by definition. A judge is supposed to be apolitical. If you're a left-leaning individual, you don't even understand that concept. If you're right-leaning, you're supposed to be able to understand it, but that does not mean you will always work to keep your human emotions out of your job. You're better at it, usually, as a generality, the right is better at it, but they're not without, faults in this. But we shouldn't be thinking left and right-wing judge. What that does is proves to you that the Anti-Federalists' fears were correct. We will get to that. Here's another one. Just in. Biden judge rules Trump firing member of labor board unlawful. Why? They're under the executive. Trump is the chief executive. That's like saying, hey, Bill Gates, you can't fire anybody that works for Microsoft. Since when? Even if you're a member of a union, you can be fired. Well, it violates the contract. That's a contract dispute. Well, guess what? You can't sue the president or the administration over a contract dispute. You have to go sue Congress for that. Well, it was the executive that did it. Yeah, but he doesn't authorize the funds. He just executes the contract. You have the wrong jurisdiction. You can't try the president. You can't sue the president. That's a constitutional thing. The courts are just looking for any way to stop the president and his agenda, which, by the way, is undemocratic. The president was elected. The president, President Trump, is doing exactly what he campaigned on. He's keeping his campaign promises. Oh, shock of shocks. I'm sure that everybody in Washington, D.C. doesn't understand that at all. But President Trump's keeping his campaign promises. He was elected for those. One of the things he told us he was going to do is put Elon in charge of Doge and turn him loose. He was elected to do this. So a judge, an unelected, unaccountable judge that steps in to thwart the will of the people is, by definition, unless it is soundly constitutional act, that judge is, by definition, a subversive, and that is a violation of U.S. law. And they can be arrested for this. You don't have to impeach them. You can arrest them and put them in jail. They can't do their job from jail. This stuff doesn't have to be put up with. Now, we do put up with it to help maintain civility in our country and avoid civil war. But if one side of our political spectrum is just going to act openly lawlessly, we are back at a state of nature. The government has failed to do its job, and it's breached contract with the whole of the American people. So either we start enforcing the laws and let the chips fall where they may, or we go back to the Jefferson option. But this judge here, Obama Judge Beryl Howell, sides with Perkins Coie, the DNC law firm linked to Hillary Clinton and bogus Russian dossier, and blocks part of Trump's executive order. He's basically saying you people can't do business with the government anymore. And they're saying, well, he's just trying to get back at, well, yes, he's trying to get back at his enemies because you had a law firm knowingly and willingly engaging in false documentation that was presented into the legal system and into our political system to malign and smear and take out President Trump. And they tried to prosecute and impeach him over known false allegations. They fabricated evidence. This entire law firm should have been disbanded over this. They should be disbarred and barred from practicing law ever again. So you have a lawless law firm that the left-wing bar association will not punish. And you have a president trying to obey the laws of this land. So far he has. To his credit, man, I am surprised. And good on him. I think he's making a few strategic mistakes, but we'll get to that. But you have a president trying to uphold the laws, and you have a judge saying, no, you've got to keep going with the lawlessness that we've created. This judge ought to be put in jail. I'm serious. That ought to be put in jail. Now you got this one. Comment on the board by Barbara Stratton. FAR regulations govern federal contracts, and I'm certain Dodge has FAR covered. Oh, yes. Yeah. A lot of what's going on right now, when we pay attention to the details, not the media hype, they're spinning this. They're lying to you. The left wing, mainstream, whatever legacy media, they're lying to you. Straight up lying. And a lot of politicians are lying to you. They're not giving you the details of what's going on here. We're going to cover some of that. But this is all setting up to our study today. Another story here. Federal judge blocks the immediate deportation of the Columbia student Mohammed Khalil after ICE detention and green card revocation. Now, this is thoroughly trampling on an area that the courts have no room to adjudicate. I already read this morning in another article, a Democratic representative, an elected member of Congress, says that this is illegal. He had legal residence here, permanent legal residence, so he's got freedom of speech. 1, a green card is not permanent legal residence. 2, if you're a foreign national, you do not have the civil rights under the United States of America. You have human rights, but not civil. Your freedom of speech can be restricted in this country. 3, nobody in the United States has the freedom to advocate violence against other folks. This man is advocating intifada, which is just another word for jihad against Israel. That makes him a terrorist, even under Obama and Biden's technical letter of the law. The State Department has the right to evict this man, to revoke his green card and evict him. They don't need any reasons. He has no right to be in this country. This is a privilege. The judges do not get to step in here and say, well, he's got rights. No, he doesn't. He has no right or claim to citizenship of the United States of America. He was allowed this as a privilege. He violated it. The State Department, which comes under the presidency, the executive branch, can kick them out. This is another lawless judge. Then we have this story here. Hostile Biden-appointed judge appears set to force change to Hegseth's transgender policy. How does the judiciary force anything on the military? The military is the sole domain of the commander-in-chief, which last time I read the Constitution is the president. The Justice Department has no control over the policies set by the president for the Defense Department. None. This is a straight up, personally driven agenda trying to be forced through the courts onto the executive. It is an usurpation of the executive authority and power. That judge right there, that's subversion. This is just another story about this judge. This is crazed Biden judge shreds DOJ lawyers. No, actually, she didn't. She berated them. There's a different word, different comment there, meaning. She demands that Hegseth issue written retraction over transgender troops in an ex post. First of all, that's not how a judge acts. She should be disbarred for that. That's not good conduct, and that is an impeachable offense. She's pushing her personal agenda. That is not her job. She should be fired, permanently barred from public service and the practice of law. Now, this is Restoring America from the Washington Examiner. The constitutional option, impeachment of activist judges. Yes, that is the proper way of doing this. Problem is, it won't happen because you need 2/3 of the Senate to say, yeah, we're going to get rid of that judge. The Democrats are not going to do that. The Democrats have already renounced any claim, to moral high ground or common decency or lawfulness. They are, as a political party, the left has been given over to its depravity. And they are what the Apostle Peter would have said is nothing but animals, good for nothing but to be led to the slaughter. They're animals. And I do mean it that way. They've, spiritually speaking, they have given up any claim to civil society and to any claim to the kingdom. I'm sorry. I know them by their fruit. And they are not behaving like an opposition party deserving of any respect from law-abiding and civil citizens, no matter what side of this political spectrum you're on. Then this story. This is the one I told you about. Trump signs an executive order cracking down on radical activists, judges, and far-left groups abusing the court. I don't know if you know about this one, but basically, I didn't know about this. There's a law. It's a U.S. law, and it says if you're going to sue the government, the plaintiff, the one doing the suing, has to put enough money in an escrow to pay the government's costs of defending the case. And if you lose, that money comes back to the government. And the president, has told the attorney general and the Department of Justice, from now on, you enforce this law. So what he's saying is, if you're going to file a claim against me from now on, you got to put a whole bunch of money into an escrow account. In other words, you lose control over it. And if you do not win your case, you lose your escrow account. Now that means that money stays in an escrow until the government exhausts all of its appeals. So this is very slick. What the president could do is just, okay, you got to put We're going to estimate it's going to cost me $3 million to fight this case against Hegseth wanting to put all the transgender, the people with the mental problems into the military, which, by the way, is a security clearance vulnerability. And you shouldn't be able to be in the military if you're that way aligned, because you're not normal. It had to be normalized because it's not normal. By definition, it's a deviancy. The military can kick you out for that. Trust me, I know the U.S. the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. I was a Marine. I know how this works. You can get kicked out. There are morality clauses in the UCMJ, and they have not been changed. They haven't. So say, okay, it's going to cost $3 million. So that person has to deposit $3 million in an account. And the judge makes a ruling, says, hey, Seth, you got to do it. So then I file an appeal with the courts, and I just wait. I don't push it. I let it sit there for as long as possible. And we get to an appeal on a lower court. The lower court says, no, I'm going to side with this crazy judge. Okay, fine. Look at the statutes. I have X amount of time before I have to appeal to the Supreme Court. So wait until the last day, file the case with the Supreme Court. Wait till they decide what to do with it. Just exhaust your appeals as slowly as possible. You could tie up hundreds of millions of dollars in escrow accounts that will eventually come back to the federal government. And these people will be defunded and have their money because as Doge dries this up, they'll put, we're going to have a stay. Just ignore the stays. Just ignore them. They have no authority to stay any of this. They've got to get an ultimate ruling on this. And just ignore them until that time. Fight this legal battle. If they want to fight legal warfare, go for it. And the president's starting to do that. Then we also have this one here. Comment on the board from Aaron Spikes. Bad thing is, if Trump allows these judges to do this and follows their orders, it sets a precedent that the judicial has more authority than the executive. And then we're screwed. They're already exercising more authority than the executive. And yes, I know. I've been blogging that opinion for a while, Mr. Spikes. The thing is, if you're still in the system, they haven't set the precedent until you exhaust your appeals and you have a final ruling from the Supreme Court. So yes, that is a threat. But the problem here is you are getting good judges. And by good, I mean people who are applying the Constitution properly and staying in their lane and within their authority, who are ruling exactly opposite of these other judges. So you have precedents in both directions, which forces the Supreme Court to clean this up. And if they don't, this is where I'm heading with all of this. We're in a constitutional crisis. Well, that takes us here. Democracy docket. Not a right-wing rag. Not from what I see. It says Trump's firings target a 90-year-old precedent protecting independent agencies. A precedent. Exactly what Mr. Spikes was talking about. This is a ruling that basically said the president does not have unlimited authority over the executive. Okay, fine. The judiciary doesn't have unlimited authority over the Constitution. There, I can ignore you whenever I want. Well, the judges will say, well, no, that doesn't work. The Constitution says I have yeah, well, guess what? The Constitution says he has unlimited authority over the executive. Well, we're going to get to this case in detail later. And I'll show you something else here in a few minutes. But this case that we're talking about, I've got a link I'm going to share with you here in a little bit if you're interested in it. It's a law professor who will explain it to you in detail. But the case basically said that it rests on the communication agency or something or other, telecommunication, or whatever. It basically said, but because this agency has partial legislative, partial executive, and partial judicial authority, the president isn't the sole authority over it. Therefore, he can't fire anybody before the end of their term. Since when? Since when can I have a bureaucracy that is all three powers under one bureaucracy? What the Supreme Court should have done in that case is dismissed, let the president fire that person, and then declare that agency unconstitutional. Because if it has the ability to make law, enforce the law, and adjudicate the law, it's unconstitutional on its face. So they got that wrong. They also got it wrong that the Trade Commission or whatever the heck it was, that it wasn't solely under the executive. It is. In other words, we have a case that's bad ruling. 90-year-old case that goes all the way back to FDR And it's an expanding of Woodrow freaking Wilson's goals, his plans. So this case that the judges today are resting on, that are saying the president doesn't have unlimited authority, they're basically saying he has no authority. They're abusing this case, especially since in the ruling, the case they're using said, yes, the executive has authority over everything, but this one agency, it was an exception. And if you'd like, this is the YouTube video. It says, "You won't believe how Trump just outfoxed liberal judges." Well, be careful with that. This is Dr. Stephen Turley. Apparently, he's a law professor. He's very good. He does explain what's going on right now very nicely. It's a 12, 13-minute video. It's in the permanent notes down here now on Rumble. And I think that Natasha's going to stick it up in your comment section here for you. But he'll go over this case law right in here is where he does this right there. It's down at the bottom. I'm showing you the point in the show. But that's 15 minutes. He'll explain it to you. He does a very good job with it. And he explains to you that these judges are resting on something that they don't have the authority to rest on. It's bad law, especially since it's case law rather than constitutional law. And we're going to get into how this was never intended to be. This is one of the things that the Anti-Federalists warned us was going to happen. Now, why did I go through all of this? We are in a constitutional crisis. You have an elected, accountable official in the President of the United States who is trying to exercise his due authority and his duty, his constitutional duties, and enforce the law and to enforce the agenda he ran on. Excuse me, like I said, allergies. He's trying to implement the agenda he ran on that he was elected to implement. And you have an unelected, unaccountable judiciary unlawfully getting in the way of his administration. They are impeding the proper exercise of the executive, of the presidency. That is, by definition, subversion. That is against U.S. code. These judges can, and in my opinion, should be arrested for subversion. Go get a few of them, perp walk them on TV, charge them, and prosecute. Prosecute. You get a few of these folks and you'll straighten them back up. The rest will either get in line or they'll get prosecuted too. I know the Constitution says you can't remove them, and as long as they're good behavior, blah, 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 blah. Well, we need to go find out what good behavior means, because that's not an impeachable thing. That's not covered under impeachment. The Constitution doesn't tell us how to handle that. That's what the judiciary is supposed to do. Excuse me a minute. The judiciary is supposed to explain where the Constitution is silent. But it's supposed to do that according to the spirit of the law of the time. We will get into that. Now, I want to show a few things to you. This is just going to take a second. It's a little pamphlet. It's very thin, see? A little small one. It's called The Law. It's by Frederick Bastiat. He first published it in 1850, I believe. It's about what the law is supposed to do and how it's supposed to function. He's writing in reaction to the French Revolution. The French Revolution is of the spirit of the progressive movement, progressive spirit, the spirit of the French Revolution, humanism, secular humanism and collectivism. In other words, spirit of the age, the spirit of the air, the spirit of this world. It's a worldly, earthly way of looking at things. It's Hobbes. It's Thomas Hobbes. And the Federalists were of this spirit. Yes, they were founding fathers, but they were of the spirit of secularism, humanism, Thomas Hobbes. And we need to understand that. But that book right there is very worth reading. And it's in your homework assignment for this class. I also have another one. This comes from the Encounter Broadside series. This is Why Progressive Institutions Are Unstable. It's by Richard A. Epstein, not connected to Jeffrey Epstein in any way that I'm aware of. It's just a little book. And it tells you why it is that the left-wing ideology doesn't work, why it fails. Then we have another book, Richard Epstein again, How Progressives Rewrote the Constitution. And they did, by interpretation. They did it through the judiciary. Stay with me. I'm going to show you that all of this was foreseen by the founding fathers. Senator Mike Lee, Our Lost Constitution, the willful subversion of America's founding document. Subversion can be prosecuted under U.S. code. And they have subverted it exactly the way the Anti-Federalists said they would. It didn't take a lot. All it took is somebody who knows history and human nature, and you're a prophet. Just do the math, and you understand what was going to happen. This one here is Who Killed the Constitution, the Federal Government versus American Liberty, from World War I to Barack Obama. From Woodrow freaking Wilson to the Manchurian candidate, Barack Obama, who, by the way, if you've been paying attention, there are some very serious, very respectable voices out there starting to say that that's exactly what he was, a Manchurian candidate. He was not a citizen of the United States and not eligible to be president, and that he is responsible for a lot of what is going on right now. He destroyed this country. I agree with that. And then this one, Men in Black, How the Supreme Court is Destroying America, Mark Levin. This is one of his first books. It's an old one since before he started to go cuckoo on us. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. That all tells you that the Constitution is being destroyed. Now, this is where we start understanding what's going on. You go to your homework. This is the blog page, The Road to Concord. This is the homework for classes 495, 497, 499, and however long we go. You're going to see a whole bunch of things in here. This time I do something a little different. I introduce you to the class. And basically what I'm telling you in here is you have to recognize that we have all been deceived. And we have. We've been lied to in some cases, straight up lied to. Other cases, we've been taught things by our teachers who thought that they were teaching us the truth. But that's because they were teaching out of history books that were teaching lies. So the teachers did not realize that they were teaching falsehoods. I would say it was their responsibility to test that stuff, but that's me. They might not have intentionally been trying to pervert it. But you have this quote, no one is going to give you an education to overthrow them. And that's true. In fact, they've used the education system to indoctrinate us. We have been deceived, and we have to remember this old proverb here, this maxim, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. It's Shakespeare. Comes from, I believe it was Macbeth. But what it's telling us is that we have been so lied to for so long that nobody knows what to believe anymore. Then I'm going to explain to you, you have a civic duty to learn your history, to learn the Constitution as it was supposed to be implemented and as it was supposed to operate, as it was originally intended to work. You have a civic duty to do that, to know that, and to uphold it as best you can, and to not sit idly and quietly by. Now, that's going to be difficult because we've been taught that, only experts can do this stuff. That's not true. That's one of the lies. You do not need to be an expert. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a constitutional scholar to understand this stuff. The founding fathers wanted the law and the Constitution to be accessible by the average citizen. Their words, not mine. Okay, and they wrote the Constitution in a language that an 8th grader or somebody with the equivalent of an 8th grade education at their time would have totally understood. And they wrote for the average citizen in the newspapers of the time. And you're going to start reading some of what they wrote. The average citizen understood these writings. Charlie has told me, hey, I need some help translating this. Charlene, Natasha rather, she has actually asked me, hey, can you translate this? A lot of people today read it. They don't understand what the founding fathers are talking about. The average citizen of the time did. Well, congratulations. We're so much better than we used to be. We're more enlightened, more intelligent, more educated. No, you're not. You're more indoctrinated. You're more dumbed down, more of a drone than they were back then. These things were discussed in the pubs at the time, which was their social media, literally. It was a social event, and they got to spread the news and discuss and talk about these things. You can still do this. You can. You got to put this programming device down, turn off the one on your wall that you watch every night, the television, the programming box called television, and find a half hour, 45 minutes a day to do your homework and to do a little studying, a little reading here and there, or audio. We live in a world today where you can get AI to read the book for you. You go to your homework today, you're going to find a lot of what I've given you are free copies of the books we're going to be using, PDFs, things that you can read through. If you don't care about this and you won't do your civic duty, then shut up when it doesn't go your way. And if you lose your rights, it's what you wanted. If you will not defend them, you don't deserve them. This is one of the reasons the Founding Fathers wanted to limit the right of voting. But what we're dealing with today are the courts. Courts bring you a comment on the board from Florida Amsoil Man. Hey, Charlie. Says everything the Anti-Federalists predicted would happen has come to pass. Yes, we're going to be talking about that in the next hour. So this is a quote from John Quincy Adams, and he's talking to you about lawyers. Now, there were a lot of lawyers in the Founding Fathers, in the group that wrote the Declaration of Independence, in the group that wrote the Constitution. In our first, there are a lot of them. But what he's talking about here is law logic, an artificial system of reasoning exclusively used in courts of justice, but good for nothing anywhere else. He's correct. The logic that most legal systems use today, at least in the United States, is not logical. It's irrational. They claim it's logic, and it has a logic to it. It has a way of thinking to it that does make sense if you're in it, but that you have to share its delusion in order for it to make sense to you. And that's what leads to somebody saying, well, it depends on what your definition of it is. That's the stupidity and the insanity that we're dealing with in the courts. And that was pointed out by the Founding Fathers. So our civic duty is to learn this stuff. Don't dismiss yourself. We're still in your homework assignment. You can do this. And it's important. And we're going to start by showing you how to do it. The next few weeks, that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to show you how to, rather than tell you what to do, I'm going to walk you through it. It's going to be slower. It's going to be a little less entertaining. It's going to be a whole lot more informative. And if my voice is ever silenced and you learn your lessons, not just what we're teaching, but how we're doing it, you'll be able to take care of things for yourself when you're left alone. Then I start here with some references. The United States Constitution, Madison's notes on the debates of the federal Constitution. I got to clean that up for you a little bit. The Constitution of the United States, that's annotated. And then the commentaries of the Constitution of the United States from 1833 by Joseph Story. He's one of the latest, he's one on the back end of the Founding Fathers. Then I'm going to give you the Anti-Federalists first. Brutus 11, Brutus 12, parts 1 and 2, Brutus 14, parts 1 and 2, and Brutus 15. These are going to be important to read. Before we're done with our study, I'm going to ask you to read those. Then I'm going to give you the pertinent Federalist papers, the ones dealing with the judiciary. Your homework assignment is right here. Federalists 78. I believe it was Madison written in 1788. I want Federalist 78 read before next week. This is the current judiciary's position. This is the Federalists' position. This is Hamilton's position. This is the progressive position on the judiciary. I want us to know the other side before we deal with the Anti-Federalists. But I consider the Anti-Federalists much more important. For those who are ambitious, Federalists 79, Federalists 80 and 81, they're connected. Federalists 83 and 82, they're all right there. Then there's some historic contributions. The two treatises on government, which is right here. That's John Locke. The commentaries on English law. I don't expect you to read all of these. This would be a lot of reading, especially the commentaries on English law. But that's by Sir William Blackstone. The Founding Fathers reference him a lot. It's going to come up. It's going to come up in our study here with the judiciary. But that's been put in your show notes for you. The spirit of the law. This is by Montesquieu. I want you to see something. See that puppy? I don't expect you to read that. I've read it. A lot of it's kind of boring. This is a philosopher. But what he's talking about is essentially what another Frenchman, Bastiat's, talking about. So if you want to read this, knock yourself out. Or you can read this. Okay. This will give you the same thing this does. He just makes the case very solidly. It will come up in, especially since Brutus in the Anti-Federalists, he cites Montesquieu in the spirit of the law. So we're going to run into that. You're also going to, there's right here, I've given you the law, Frederick Bastiat, some personal study tools. This right here, Et tu, Brute, is tomorrow. Yeah, more Shakespeare. This right here is a link to Amazon's Kindle reader that goes on your computer. You can put it on your phone. I have it on my computer. It's free. You download it. You can read any Kindle book. And if you have Prime, some of the ebooks are free. You can get some of the books we're reading. You can get the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers for free if you've got Amazon Prime and everything. So some of that you can just get really cheap. This here, the Federalist Anti-Federalist Papers, complete collection, including the U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, important documents by the Founding Fathers, and more. It's free if you have Prime. It's 99 cents if you don't. 99 cents, folks. And you can read it on your free Kindle reader on your computer, and it will allow you to highlight and make notes and copy the notes and put notes out to the side. It is a very powerful Kindle reader for a 99-cent copy of just about everything you need right now. Then for the case, the study we're having, then you have Men in Black, How the Supreme Court is Destroying America. That's Levin's book. So we're going to read those things. We're going to use them. We're going to make use of them in the coming weeks as we go through the judiciary. Still setting the table here. We're going to explain the court's position on this. The court's position is that the president does not have unlimited authority over the executive. Where does the court, the current justices that are trying to stop President Trump's putting into his campaign promises, his administration putting into practice. They're trying to stop this. They're trying to subvert democracy. They're trying to subvert the rule of law and our constitutional system. It is subversion. It's illegal. So their position is resting on this one flawed, and it's not my opinion. When you read into this case, and we'll cover it a little bit more going forward, we're going to cover it probably next week. Go watch the video I've given you the link to. It'll take just a few minutes. When you when you understand this flawed ruling, it was known for a long time. There's been many, many arguments against this ruling, saying it was flawed for several reasons. And I would argue that it's flawed just on its foundational premise. Its foundations are flawed, not just the justice's understanding of the facts in the case, but the case itself. The filing was flawed and should have been tossed. It should have never came to light, never come to the courts. So what they're saying is because of this one ruling that said, yes, all executive power rests in the presidency, except in I think it's the Federal Trade Commission. I don't remember, except in this one department. In that one, the president needs permission to act, but all the others, he can do it. Well, where does that precedent give them the right to tell the Department of Defense what to do, or the Department of Justice what to do, or Doge? It doesn't. So what they're doing is they're expanding a ruling. They're taking bad law and making it worse. And they're saying, well, because that ruling said, they take just one little clause out of it, out of context, president doesn't have unlimited authority. And now they're saying, well, see, that justifies my ruling. Totally out of context, which makes that a fraud upon the court. And that right there, what they're doing to subvert the presidency, they're committing a fraud upon the court from their own rulings, from their own legal system of precedence, their law logic that has no logic outside of their little world. to commit a fraud. That right there is a disbarring act and an impeachable act. That is a high crime and misdemeanor for a judge. They should be impeached. But because the Democratic Party just does not care about the Constitution anymore, but only their own party power, their own personal gain and wealth, and because Doge is taking away the cookie jar that makes them rich, they're going crazy and they won't do their job. So we are in a constitutional crisis that amounts to a cultural and spiritual civil war, a hot war. So what we have to do is we have to hearken back to the founding fathers' own words. That's where we're going to go in the next hour. Jefferson once said to raise a banner to which posterity can retreat to repair things when they go wrong. But what he was saying is, in other words, leave enough of a record so that when it goes wrong, those of us in the future, posterity, the descendants of these founding fathers and their people, we can go back to what they were doing, what they were trying to do, why, how they went about it. We can see their reasoning, and we can fix the mess that we're in. That's what we have to do. We have to go back to that banner. And that's where we're going to start when we come back. We're going to come back from the break. I'm going to take it just a few minutes early. When we come back from the break, we're going to go back to the founding fathers' own words. I've got a slideshow for you. I'm going to show you some of them. I'm going to take you to the Constitution. We're going to explain what's going on here. And I want you to think about it in your own time, in your own way. You've got to decide for yourself. And then you can't remain silent. I don't mean you got to get online, start your own show, start blogging, blah, 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 blah. But I'll give you a personal example so I can lead by example. I have a friend of mine. I've known him for over 20 years, 25 years now. He's a good friend of mine. He lives in St. Louis. Modeling buddy. Left-leaning. He's not a left-wing whack job. He's left-leaning, center-left. And he has been objecting to some of the things I've been posting online. He's not a Trump fan. He's not a Elon fan. But he's been saying, well, I've been putting up some memes and making some comments. He goes, well, the right does it too. And I've told him, yes, you're right. You're correct. I said, however, I'm not talking about Democrat and Republican. I'm talking philosophical left and right. I'm talking on the philosophical and spiritual basis. And I have slowly and gently started to explain my position to him. Gently, because he has shown he'll listen. I don't do this for people who don't listen, but he has shown he will listen. So I'm trying to show him what I'm seeing and why. And because he goes kicking and screaming, but he will respond to factual evidence. But when you find somebody who's willfully ignorant, and again, paw in the air, I'm guilty of this. It is fun to bash on them. That just adds to the problem. When we do that, especially with the meme wars, look, well, we destroyed him. We did a good one again. We're just the opposite wing of the same bird. From the position of that poor indoctrinated cult member, we don't seem any different. We're just in a different cult. You must be born again, born from on high, from above. And you must accept and understand and bow your knee, if nothing else, at least to logic and reason. Right reasoning. The dictates of logic governed by wisdom of experience and human nature and natural law. Don't become the right wing of the humanist, secular humanist, fascist, whatever bird that controls, the spirit of the air, the spirit of the age. Don't become part of that. Resist the urge, and I'm guilty. Guilty. Does everybody see this? Both hands in the air. I'm guilty. Resist the urge to pull the wings off these flies on social media. Teach the ones who show some reason and some ability to respond to reason. Teach gently and kindly. When they quit, when they start balking and they won't accept facts and reasoning, leave them be. It is useless to administer, to reason with somebody who's renounced the use of reason. It's as useless as trying to administer medicine to the dead. Just don't do it. Take the high road. But you can't do this explaining if you don't know it yourself. Very wise man once said that if you really understand the subject, you can explain it simply in simple terms that anybody can understand. And when you can't do that, it's a good indication. You know, when you're starting to use big words and lots of them, in other words, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, you're going to baffle them with bull. And I don't mean brilliance like, you know, Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory. I mean brilliance like Thomas Sowell. Take a very deep, complicated, you know, nuanced argument and boil it down to a one sentence quip. Oh, wow. That's what makes him a genius. He explains a very complicated thing in one easy to understand sentence that all of us can digest. You need to know these things well enough that you can at least explain them. Until you can do that, don't try to explain them. You can confuse and make it worse. Until you do know it well enough, stick with it. Get it in your head. It's usually not that hard, especially if all you focus on is the basics. Just focus on the basics. You don't have to worry about the nuance. Focus on the ice cream. Let other people argue over the flavors. As long as you know it's ice cream, it doesn't matter if it's mint chocolate chip, Rocky Road, or butter pecan. It's ice cream. When we get back, we're going to talk about the founders and the judiciary, and we're going to set the stage for next week in Federalist 78 and the Federalist position on the judiciary. We'll see you in 6 minutes. Welcome back. We're going to meet the founders here real quick. But before we do, I want to discuss something with you. I've never put it this way. It just dawned on me to explain it this way. Logic, especially right reasoning, it's the science of ideas. It's the science of the study of ideas. Science is the study of nature. Right reasoning is the science of ideas, thoughts. Both the sciences of study of nature and the study of ideas and thoughts both rest on the principles of logic. But what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks on Friday, we're going to apply the principles of the study of ideas, the science of studying ideas. The bedrock formulas here is very easy. The ice cream here is you've got a problem. Okay. When you have a problem, and we're dealing with ideas, right? Go to the original source. Who invented it? Who was the first one credited with this idea? What did they say about it? Go to as close to the original source as you can get. Then the first thing you do, just kind of familiarize yourself with the problem. You already have an idea. Study the other side. It's a little different than the scientific method you've been taught, but study the other side. What does, like for us, for me, I've got a problem with the way these activist judges are acting and their rulings. I want to see the other side first. What is their political ideology? And in this case, what is their opinion on the law? How do they see their job as a judge? How do they see the law? How to interpret the law? That's what I want to study. That specific flavor of their political ice cream, the judiciary. So I want to go see what these judges are thinking and how they're thinking and why they're doing what they're doing. It might be difficult for me, but I can do it. I'm rational. Rational can understand the irrational in general sense. You may not understand why they like the particular flavor of ice cream they like, but you can, in general terms, understand what they're doing. The irrational will never understand the rational. The darkness doesn't understand the light. Okay, so original sources, study the other side, then study my side, the opposition of that, the opposite, the people that wrote about things the way I see it. Do the math, crunch the numbers, and then decide for yourself. This is the basic process that we're going to have to go through. So for me, okay, let's go to the founding fathers. This should be fairly easy for all of us. It is the duty of every good citizen to use all the opportunities which occur to him for preserving documents relating to the history of our country. Thomas Jefferson in a letter to Hugh P. Taylor, October 4th, 1823. It's about a year before I think Jefferson dies. He's elderly in life. 1823. And he's saying, preserve everything you can get your hands on. Why? So that people can go back to it and understand what's going on. So that's what good old Joe is going to try to do. Go back to the original sources as best I can. Why? Thomas Jefferson's one of the ones who wrote the system. No, he did not write the Constitution. He did write the Declaration, the what and the why of America, the spirit of America. He didn't write the how, but he had a lot of commentary about it. And I happen to think that was Providence. I don't think the Constitution would have been as good had Jefferson been in the country at the time. So I think it was providential that he wasn't. But that does not mean I disagree with his opinions. I think he's a very good critic of the problems we're dealing with. Now, this is John Quincy Adams. We've already read this. Law logic, an artificial system of reasoning exclusively used in courts of justice, but good for nothing anywhere else. Keep that in mind. This is Thomas Jefferson again. This is in a letter from William Johnson dated June 12, 1823. It's also close to the end of his life here. He says, on every question of construction, not just the Constitution of our whole country, every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, when it was ratified, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Oh my gosh, we've got to stop there. In other words, don't be Woodrow freaking Wilson or a progressive and say that, well, because the word says might be instead of is, it means, well, I can just do whatever I want, be a good, whatever you I have a bias here, and it's showing. I agree with you. Yes, ma'am.
Wait a minute. Are you saying we should look at the concept and not do the word studies?
Word study after the concept. Look at the concept. This applies to your Bible, too. This
Wow,
applies to
really?
your Bible, too. What
Who'd
were they
have
trying
thought?
to do? Mm-hmm. And notice how Jefferson, he mentions ratification. The left will tell you that there's no such thing as the social contract. Folks, the Constitution was a written contract. It was negotiated between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and in the ratification process in Congress when it was debated, and then the states voted on it. That was literally the ratification of a contract. That's the social contract. That is Rousseau's definition of the social contract. So when somebody today tells you there's no such thing, that's just a fiction, they're either ignorant or they're lying. Either way, they do not deserve your serious attention. They are in need of an education instead. But what Jefferson's telling us is you go back to the original time and you stick to what you think the founders would have done and said and how they would have seen it and believed and understood it. If you disagree with and don't like that, then amend the Constitution. Oh, Joe, that's too hard. It was designed that way on purpose. It means, I can't get the Constitution amended to allow deviancy into the country as normality. The Equal Rights Amendment. Oh, Joe, that was about women. No, it wasn't. That's how they sold you. So you can't get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. That's because the majority of people don't want it. It means you're in a minority, which means the system's functioning properly. If it was something the majority of people wanted, they would pass it, like the civil rights legislation. You've got to get your head in a serious adult grown-up mindset. Jefferson says, go back to the original meaning. The next one, James Madison, in a letter to Henry Lee June 25th, 1824. So this is Madison, just the guy who wrote the Constitution. He says, I entirely concur in the propriety of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In that sense alone, it is the legitimate Constitution. And if that is not the guide in expounding it, there may be no security. In other words, if you make a ruling that is not in line with the Constitution, as the founders would have understood it, if you write a law that is not in line with the Constitution, as the founders would have understood it, it is not constitutional. You cannot progress your way through interpreting the interpretation of the quote-unquote living document. That is a bastardization of constitutional law. It is a way of amending and perverting the Constitution through the courts by quote-unquote interpreting the language differently without any reference to the original documents whatsoever. This is also why they want case law, because all I need is one ruling that is not constitutional, that ruling from 90 years ago, and now I can take the president's power away. This is the issue we're dealing with. There is a large part of our judiciary, our judges, our legal system, that believes they should have sole authority over the Constitution and the law. That is not what the Founding Fathers believed, as you're about to find out. So that's what we're wrestling with. The people who think that they alone get to dictate the law, which means that all power is under them. And then the people who think, no, the Constitution. It's like, well, the Bible means whatever I want it to mean. Well, very good. You're the crosshairs of 2 Thessalonians 2. Or, well, I may not like it, but God said it. I got to learn to live with it. I got to bring myself in line with it. That's a good citizen of the kingdom. Are you a good citizen of the Constitution? Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Eddie Messrs. Eddie, Russell, Thumber, Wheaton, and Smith. I guess that might be a legal firm. This is dated March 27, 1801. Jefferson. The Constitution on which our Union rests shall be administered by me as president, according to the safe and honest meaning contemplated by the plain understanding of the people of the United States at the time of its adoption, a meaning to be found in the explanations of those who advocated, not those who opposed it, and who opposed it merely lest the construction should be applied which they denounced as possible. What did Jefferson just say? This is important. Jefferson started out as an anti-federalist. The Constitution was not going to get ratified because he was opposing it at the time. It would have failed. But Madison imposed on his friendship with Jefferson, and Jefferson came over to the Federalist side. And that's when the Federalists won their argument and the states ratified the Constitution. What Jefferson is saying now is he still holds his beliefs as an anti-federalist, but he did some realpolitik, Woodrow Wilson style here. He didn't want the Constitution to fail and he didn't want the country to dissolve, so he sided with Madison to get it passed. But he forced the Federalists to explain how they understood it to be out to operate. And what he's saying is, as president, I might disagree with a lot of this, but I am going to enforce the Constitution according to the way the Federalist Papers explained that it was meant to operate, because they won the debate, and that's the side that the country ratified, that understanding. So he's going to go with the Federalist Papers. That is the proper way to do this. He says the Anti-Federalists lost, so I cannot defer to their thinking. And I still agree with him. But modern times, we have to repair a broken system. Now we have to go back to what the Federalists said the system was supposed to do and fix it in light of the factual truth the Anti-Federalists warned us against. We have 2020 hindsight, but it's irrelevant. In the case in point here is Jefferson was saying, I will administer the Constitution the way it was intended to be administered as president. Whether I agree with that or not, I'll do the job. That's a statesman, folks. That's not a politician. That's a statesman. He's going to do the job. That's a civil servant. Our judges today are not doing that. If they were, they would tell all these people bringing cases to say, hey, he's the president. He has in charge of the executive. Elections have consequences. I hate it. I disagree with it. I can't wait till we get to vote him out. But until then, he has the authority. Well, the judges won't do that. They're going against Jefferson's own personal way of looking at this. This is very good right here, folks. This is the way we're supposed to govern. This is how a law-abiding civil society operates. Now, this is from Federalists, number 44. This is James Madison, January 25th, 1788, published in New York, city of New York, which at the time was our capital. What is to be the consequence in case Congress shall misconstrue this part, the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, and exercise powers not warranted by its true meaning? It says, what's going to happen if Congress expands the necessary and proper clause beyond its scope? And that has happened, folks. That has happened. So Madison says he's Federalist. This is the side that won. I answer the same as if they should misconstrue or enlarge any other part vested in them. The success of the usurpation will depend on the executive and judiciary departments, which are to expound and give effect to the legislative acts. In the last, a remedy must be obtained from the people, who can, by their election of more faithful representatives, annul the acts of the usurper. So what he's saying is, if Congress goes beyond its authority and the judiciary and the executive allow it, then the people have to vote in new representatives to change things. Well, that implies that the judiciary and the presidency can oppose unconstitutional actions. Well, how exactly would that happen, and why is the executive included? Well, that's because, according to the Federalist Papers, all three branches are equal in their authority over the Constitution. They can all interpret it equally. It was not the sole domain of the judiciary. It was never intended to be. Hamilton will say it is, but that's because Hamilton was lying when he wrote the Federalist Papers. He was being deceitful. He was trying to put one past us. He was definitely I want a king. I want a strong central government. I don't want a federal government, blah, 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 blah. Well, federal doesn't mean strong central government. Federal means a co-op, a commonwealth between independent states. That's what it means. So he was writing in favor of a system he did not believe in. He was a Woodrow Wilson. We'll get to that later. Back to Madison. Madison is, it by implication, he's saying if the Congress exceeds its authority, the president can just not execute those laws. And the judiciary can side with the president. Or if the president holds up the law, the judiciary can then say, no, that's unconstitutional. But the judiciary has no means of enforcing itself. So inherent in Federalist 44 is the explicit implication that if Congress overreacts, the executive and the judiciary can stop them. Well, by transitive property, if the president overreacts, the judiciary and the Congress can stop him. Well, Congress is allowing all the things that President Trump's doing right now, so they're in agreement. And half of the judiciary is in agreement too. We're dealing with a subversive force. That's logic. That's logical extension. We're dealing with subversives within the judiciary, a fifth column. James Madison in Federalist 48, February 1st, 1788. Madison says, no political truth is certainly of greater intrinsic value or is stamped with the authority of more enlightened patrons of liberty than that on which the objection is founded. In other words, it should be self-apparent, self-obvious. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Well, for one thing, he just said that the world Woodrow Wilson envisioned, the bureaucracy, is tyranny. But what he also said is if you have a judiciary that thinks it alone gets to tell you what is legal, and it alone gets to decide what part of the, when we did Obamacare and Roberts rewrote when the Supreme Court rewrote Obamacare, they took the legislative powers away from Congress when they did that. And now when the court is telling the president how to run the executive, they have assumed the legislative, executive, and judicial powers under one body. So unless the executive and the legislature stop these judges, then we have judicial tyranny, which is exactly what the Anti-Federalists said would happen. Now, the Federalists argue that won't happen. Why? Because the executive and the legislative would stop them. Well, they haven't. Why? Because they have all come under the same authority. When you have Democrats in power, all three branches come under the power of the Democratic Party, which is why President Washington told us not to have parties, not to have factions, because it would be party über alles. That's where we're at. The Federalists told us they didn't think this would happen. Hamilton knew this would happen. That's what he was wanting. Madison was a sincere dope, in my opinion. Jefferson knew this was coming. This is Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 78. Federalist 78 is your homework assignment for next Friday. If you have not read it, you're going to be lost next week. Federalist 78, Hamilton, this is 1788. And it proves in the last place that liberty can have nothing to fear from the judiciary alone, but would have everything to fear from its union with either of the other departments. So Hamilton's saying, unless there's a union with either the executive or the legislature, you don't have anything to worry about. Liberty will stand supreme. Well, what if the union comes through the party and the party is in lockstep? So if you have Democratic judges and a Democratic Congress, you're going to get tyranny, according to Hamilton. And if you have a Democratic Congress and a Democratic presidency and Democratic justices, you have tyranny, according to Hamilton. The Federalists tried to tell him this. They wanted some changes made to the Constitution. They weren't changed. But we did get the Bill of Rights because of the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were saying, why do you need the Bill of Rights? If you adhere to the Constitution the way we're explaining it, you don't need them, because of the 9th and 10th Amendments. Well, the 9th and 10th Amendments weren't in the Constitution. That's how you got the Bill of Rights and why. So Hamilton, I don't like this man. I'm glad Aaron Burr got his little booty. I'm sorry, but he probably saved us from a lot of bad times. All right. Here's where we start seeing the Anti-Federalists. Remember, Jefferson joined the Federalists. That's the only reason we have the U.S. Constitution. If it hadn't been for him, it probably would never have happened. But he never abandoned his concerns and his objections. This is one of them. This is in a letter to Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, September 11th, 1804. The opinion which gives to the judges the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what are not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and executive also in their spheres, would make the judiciary a despotic branch. Now, we already saw where Madison and even Hamilton said that won't happen because the executive and the legislature both have equal authority to interpret the Constitution for themselves. Over time, the judiciary has usurped, I don't know how to say that word, usurped, they've taken over control of the interpretation of the Constitution and made it their sole domain. And now they are telling the legislature, like Obamacare, I'm going to line item veto this, not that, change this, you got to add that, that's not a tax, even though you said it was a tax. They wrote law. And now they're telling the executive what to do, what it can't do, and how to do it with Trump. That's a despotic branch of government, even according to Hamilton. Because what united them is not the fact that they have control over the executive and the legislature, but the party has control over it. So Jefferson's concern here has the fruits of history have borne out. He was right. That's where we're at today. This is why we have a constitutional crisis. If we allow this despotic court to continue, and it's a subversive element of the court. It's not the whole court. The court's not united in this. If we allow it to continue, we've destroyed the nation. Jefferson, in a letter to Judge Spencer Roane, September 6, 1819. The Constitution is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. That's living document doctrine, which existed even in the time of the Founding Fathers. The idea that the courts have sole authority to interpret the Constitution, that's not what the Federalists seem to be saying. Federalist 78, we're going to dissect that next week. It was probably their intention, or at least Hamilton's. I don't think it was Madison's. But we've got to understand these people, and we've got to learn what their thinking was, what they were discussing. Just like Jefferson said, we got to get back into their time, or we can't fix this thing. Thomas Jefferson, a letter to Ritchie, December 25th, 1820. A judiciary, independent of a king or an executive alone, is a good thing. In other words, an independent judiciary is a good thing. But independence of the will of the nation is a solecism. Now, I've put this definition in here for you. This is from Webster's 1828 dictionary. It's what he meant. It's an unfitness or an absurdity, or it's improper. It's an impropriety. So he says, but the independence of the will of the nation is a solecism, at least in a Republican government. So what he's saying is, if you have a judiciary that is not accountable to anybody for any reason, that's an absurdity. It's improper in a Republican form of government. It's not fit. That's what we have now. Jefferson never abandoned his objections to the judiciary the way it was explained and the way it was detailed in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Charles Hammond, August 18th, 1821, he says, it has long, however, been my opinion, and I have never shrunk from its expression, that the germ of dissolution of our federal government is in the Constitution of the federal judiciary. Now, in this case, the Constitution means the construction of. It's in your Constitution. This is ancient Well, not ancient, Old English. For it's in your makeup, it's in your nature, it's in your character. He says, now pay attention and tell me if this doesn't sound like progressivism. Working like gravity by night and by day, gaining a little today and a little tomorrow, and advancing its noiseless step like a thief over the field of jurisdiction until all shall be usurped. That's progressivism. That is literally how Woodrow freaking Wilson defined and explained progressivism. A little here, a little there, until the judiciary is in total control of the bureaucracy. All unelected, unaccountable, and all unimpeachable by that time. And that's what we're facing. We're facing the dissolution of the federal government if we don't stop this and correct it. Also, in the same letter, Jefferson, still August 18, 1821, the germ of dissolution of our federal government is in the Constitution of the federal judiciary. An irresponsible body for impeachment is scarcely a scarecrow, meaning nobody's going to impeach them. Irresponsible body working like gravity by night and by day, gaining a little today, a little tomorrow. This is an expanding on the quote. Over the field of jurisdiction until all shall be usurped from the states and government of all consolidated into one. That's what's happening. Everything's being consolidated into DC. And by the way, that little by little language, that's very biblical. Now, Jefferson, in a letter to Monsieur A. Corre, October 31st, 1823, at the establishment of our Constitution, the judiciary bodies were supposed to be the most helpless and harmless members of government. Hamilton said so. Experience, however, soon showed in what way they were to become the most dangerous, that the insufficiency of the means provided for their removal gave them a freehold and irresponsibility in office, that their decisions, seeming to concern individual suitors only, pass silent and unheeded by the public at large, that these decisions nevertheless become law by precedent, sapping by little and little the foundations of the Constitution and working its change by construction before anyone has perceived that this invisible and helpless worm has been busily employed in consuming its substance. In truth, man is not made to be trusted for life and secured against it all liability of account, or if he's unaccountable. So what Jefferson's saying here is, if you're going to have an unaccountable judiciary that cannot be easily removed for bad behavior, you've just instituted tyranny. And that's what they gave the judiciary in the Constitution. And all the Anti-Federalists were saying is, make it easier to get rid of these judges. That's where we're done here. Now, we can still do this. We're going to have to push some people to do the right thing, and it's not going to be easy. The Supreme Court is going to have a case brought before it. That's what the president's doing, to shoot down this 90-year-old law, overturn it, because it's bad law. It needs to be overturned. And we can do this. We can get that done. I think he's going to try. But make no mistake about this. If he fails, the Constitution's over. The judges, appointed but unelected, unaccountable, hold their position for life, can rewrite the laws at will, and can dictate to the legislature and the executive exactly what they have to do, and run the country through the bureaucracies. Woodrow Wilson will have the government he wanted. He will have completed the revolution. We have got to stop this. Now, the solution, the constitutional solution, seems to be in hold your position for life in times of good behavior. Good behavior is different from high crimes and misdemeanors. That's impeachment. That's mentioned in the Constitution. So how do we define good behavior? The court's going to have to expound on that. Now, if I read the Federalists, and we're going to read it, 78 next week, the Federalists do seem to say that the judges are not supposed to be deciding that this or that is constitutional if it goes against the limits of the Constitution. And they are saying that the executive and the legislature do seem to be what the Federalists are relying on to check them, checks and balances. Well, how can the legislature Congress or the presidency check the judiciary if they don't have legitimate constitutional authority to interpret the Constitution for themselves. That's the only way the Federalist argument makes sense. I'm going to assume that's what they meant. So Jefferson's going to tell you, okay, go with it the way they said, the way they won. And you know what? We're going to have to find out what good behavior is. And I would argue that what we're seeing now is that subversion is not good behavior. Well, you have to impeach them for the high crime of subversion. But we're not told you have to impeach them for good behavior. It just says they can be removed for bad behavior. Or it implies that. We're going to have the Supreme Court rule on this. That's where we're going to start next week, though, is with Hamilton. How Hamilton in 78 argued that the judiciary is supposed to work, what its authority is and how it's supposed to work. Hamilton said it's supposed to be the weakest. So what are we going to be relying on over the next few weeks? We're going to go to the original source. This is all in your homework. The debates in the Federal Convention of 1787, James Madison took notes. And we can go into this, and this is in your homework. You can find this in your homework. And you're going to find that on June 5th, the judiciary was discussed. Or at least that's the day of his notes. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at. And this is the exposition of the Constitution of the United States by Joseph Story. He was a Supreme Court justice. You can stick that back up there, Natasha. We're going to be using this as well because he discusses the judiciary. Got a comment from Barbara Stratton. It says it also contract law that if the definition of any part of the contract changes over time, the interpretation must revert to the original definition at the time of the contract. And the Constitution's a contract. Very good point, Ms. Stratton. It says, or a legal document representing a contractual agreement. I've seen them misapplied by the local government with the definition of gasoline pump. They doubled the number of ordinances allowing pumps by saying that 8 would mean 16 because most pumps are now double. Yeah, that's true. They screwed that one up. But yes, the Constitution is a contract, folks. And it goes according to these people, the Federalists. It's in your homework. It's there. So we're going to, Jefferson said, we got to institute the Constitution the way these people saw it, the way they explained it. But we're going to do it with the hindsight of these folks, the Anti-Federalists, because they were right. They were correct. Everything they told us was going to happen has happened exactly the way they told us it would happen. So we're going to be using them. Then we're going to talk about the origin of the Bill of Rights, because this is going to be applicable to the judiciary before our discussion's over. This, the complete Bill of Rights, the drafts, debates, sources, and origins. This is actually a copy of the Congressional Record dealing only with the debates over the Bill of Rights and its ratification. And you're going to find out. This one tells us why they wrote the Bill of Rights. This one tells us what they were thinking about. Oh, by the way, the First Amendment, it's not all about free speech. It was actually about freedom of conscience. Their words, not mine. And it didn't apply to other religions, only to Christianity. Their words, not mine. I'll have to add this to your homework, but this is Original Intent by David Barton. Original Intent. And it deals mostly with the First Amendment, but also with the judiciary's abominations. And the reason I'm going to include it is because most of it is quotes from the founding fathers that you're not going to find in other documents. It comes from their personal letters, which Dr. Barton owns, and which, for the most part, he can recite from memory. A lot of lefties hate him for that reason. He's a devout Christian, a pastor, and he knows the founding like the back of his hand. And he has the largest private collection of founding era documents. The only larger collection anywhere in the world is the Library of Congress. And his collection rivals it. I think he's got over 100,000 pieces of written material from the founding era, copies of them. So this is where we're going to be. In your homework, Federalist number 78. We're going to read that because this is your homework. You scroll down. You're going to find Brutus. That's the Anti-Federalist. Federalist right here, 78. There's 2 versions of it. You can read whichever one you want. This is the one I like the most, but that's just me. This is National Constitution Center, Federalist 78 right here. It gives you a summary. and then it goes through and reads parts of it. But if you go to this one, this is going to take you to the Founders Online National Archives. Notice that I'm using fairly official sources here. This is Federalist 78, and you'll notice it's not all that long. And there's all your sourcing. These were originally published in whole in New York newspaper. So it's not going to take you that long. Yes, it might take you a little while to read it because it's whoops. My bad. I screwed this up. Right here. That's Federalist 78 right there. That's it. That's it in the entirety. It's about 2.5 pages. My bad. I apologize. But it's in your class homework right here. You just click on either one of them. The one I just showed you is on the right. The one on the left is more of an abbreviation. You go to Federalists. You read 78. Next week, we'll discuss them. And we're also going to be looking at this. This is where the courts have screwed up. They're not supposed to go to case law. That's not how the Founding Fathers wanted this done. The Founding Fathers, Madison and Jefferson both. And Jefferson, after he had come over to the Federalist side, so he's espousing this. He says, you got to take this back to the original intentions. You got to go back to the explanation in Federalist Papers. You're not supposed to be using case law. You're supposed to be using the Constitution, and every record you have of the people who wrote it, ratified it, and the Bill of Rights. You're supposed to use those documents, not case law. And if you use the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. It doesn't say partial executive power. It doesn't say some executive power. It doesn't say the executive power of the judiciary will allow it. It says the executive power. That is all. Its entirety, its totality. That power shall be vested in a president of the United States. So when I bring a case that says, you can't fire me, the judge should say, stop. Article 2, Section 1, Line 1. Yeah, he can. Case dismissed. That's exactly what should happen. Oh, well, the bureaucracies, the Congress said that you can't do this. Congress set up a law, set up a bureaucracy, and then told the executive what to do. All executive power belongs to the president. So the congressional law was unconstitutional. Your remedy is either A, give all executive power to the president, or B, dissolve the agency as being unconstitutional in its base, in its foundations. That's my preference because you set up an unconstitutional bureaucratic government, a deep state, a government within a government. It's unconstitutional. Do away with it. That's Article 2, Section 1. The judiciary, Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. So that's the judicial power. You need to look up what judicial power means. We're going to do that next week. But we'll look it up under the 1828 dictionary. Matter of fact, why don't we just look that up now? I'll go to the 1828 dictionary. We'll look it up here while we're talking about this. Let me just type in judicial. This is Webster's 1828 online dictionary. I had typed that in. Judicial. And it's going to tell us that it's thinking. It doesn't want to find it. I hate it when this happens because it, for whatever reason, it doesn't want to bring it up. I did this earlier in the day. Judicial power doesn't mean exactly, it doesn't mean you have total and sole authority. It's not going to bring it up. Something's wrong with that website at the moment. My apologies, but we'll bring it up. We'll get a definition for it and we'll go from there. Definition as they understood it, the Founding Fathers understood it at the time. Looks like my internet's down. Anyhow, it can't be down. I'm still here, I guess. This is where we're at. This is where I want to leave you. This is, done talking, quit running my mouth. This is the set up for next week. Federalist 78 and anything else you want to read in your homework. But get Federalist 78 read. That's your homework assignment. If you haven't read it, the discussion is going to center around Federalist 78. And I'm not going to go through and read Federalist 78 for us. I'm just going to reference it. And I'll have certain excerpts that'll be in a slideshow that we're going to teach from. And we're going to learn how the judiciary was explained and how it's supposed to be understood. Now, in my case, I'll probably bring certain sections from the other Federalist pages, papers that were listed in your homework, because they're all dealing with the judiciary, but 78's the one everybody looks at. But that's all I want you to read. Let's see what Alexander Hamilton said the courts are supposed to do. What is their rightful authority? What's the extent? What is their power? And how are they supposed to be kept in check? And we'll go from there. And then you can start looking at the courts today. Which ones are doing things correctly, which ones aren't. Notice something. When it comes to conservative and liberal, progressive, whatever you want to call it, right and left, the right is usually original construction, original intent, and the left condemns them for that. By definition of the founders, by definition of the authors, if you are an originalist, you're lawful. You're law-abiding. If you're a progressive and you have this, living document idea, you're lawless. Or to put it as the founding fathers would say, you're a tyrant. And you're acting outside of constitutional authority. They wrote it. They ratified it. They expounded it, explained it, and ratified it. And they said it is only Madison, the head of the whole thing, the chief Federalist, the chief architect of the constitutional, the president of the convention, the one who took the notes, the one who presided over the writing of the Constitution, the one who penned it with his own hand, the one who recruited Jefferson to make sure it got passed. The primary central figure of the Constitution of the United States said the only way it is to be interpreted is in the way it was explained in the Federalist Papers. Period. Full stop. End of story. So if you are not an originalist, if you are a living document adherent, you are, by Madison's words, a subversive. And that's illegal. That can be and should be punishable by law. And if you get it wrong innocently, cool, I get that. Higher courts are there, and that's why you have a tribunal body to help you. You don't have one judge, you have a deliberation. That's why if it's one judge at a lower court, you have both lawyers there to help argue the point. And the judge is supposed to go, oh, true, yeah. And this is why we're in a constitutional crisis, by definition. Is that half the judiciary is under the control of lawless, unconstitutional, subversive tyrants who are imposing their will without election or accountability. That both Federalists and Anti-Federalists, Hamilton even said, that's tyranny. That's what we have. All right. Unless there's a question on the board, comment on the board, we're going to end here. To be changed from 8 to 16 should have required citizen interaction via public hearing protocol. Yes. I know you're talking about local ordinances, but yes, it's the same thing. That's the ice cream, not the flavor. We don't follow the rule of law. When first you practice to deceive, or in this case, when first you practice to subvert the original intention of the law, oh, what a tangled web we weave. Okay, we thank you for being here. We hope that we're being informative. I know that I'm not entertaining. That's not our purpose anymore. I'll do it from time to time just to break up the monotony or the seriousness of what we're discussing, or the boredom, monotony of it, whatever. But I hope we're being edifying, educational in a way that it strengthens, enlightens, and uplifts you, helps empower you, and arms you with knowledge that was, in many cases, withheld from you by our school system. And a lot of this I did not learn either in grade school, high school, middle school, college. None of this was taught to me. I had to go dig this up from the founding fathers themselves. Notice, take this book out of here. That's the founding fathers. That's the founding fathers. Their pen, not mine. All of this. Everything here was written by a founding father. I've got more. I got a lot more. But that's the bulk of what we're going to be using to discuss the judiciary. So if you like what we're doing, if you think it'll help others, if you think it's educational, if you think it's worth your time, do a few favors for us, please. The big one is hit the thumbs up, the like buttons. That absolutely, it helps that the show get seen by other people. If you hate what we're doing, hit the down button. We're not going to try and tell you what to do. Free will. Share it. Share the show if you think that we're doing good work. Please tell people about it. It depends on you. Spread this. Dictionary will not have judicial. No, I was just, Jimmy Zinker says it won't have it under one word. I know, but I was looking up judicial and it didn't come up, Mr. Zinker. I don't understand why. It came up earlier today in the pre-show. Sometimes computers do wonky things. But if you think we're doing good work, just share the show, spread the word, tell people about us. And we'll go from there. Oh, okay. Here's what I actually looked up. Judiciary. It means to pass judgment or sentence pertaining to the courts or judicature or legal tribunals. And as a noun, it means the branch of government which is concerned in the trial and determination of controversies between two parties. In other words, you have to apply the law to the specific cases at hand. In a criminal prosecutions, the system of court of justice in a government. An independent judicial is the firmest bulwark of freedom. Notice it didn't say the only power or authority to determine what the law says. It's supposed to determine how to apply the law in the given case. So in the case of hand, I come to the judge. Judge, Trump fired me. He's a bad man. I want my job back. Judge goes, okay, law says, because the law I have here, case law is not supposed to apply to constitutional law. The law here says, Constitution says all executive power under a single president. Well, let's see what the Federalists say. Oh, yep, all executive power under a single president. Judge comes back and says, I'm sorry, complainant, plaintiff, but the law says all executive power. You were working under the executive. He has the authority to fire you. Sucks to be you today. That's how you apply the law. You don't go, well, it says all executive power, but that can't mean in this case because I think that's unfair to fire you. You're a really good person. That's not law. You're no longer practicing law. You're not. So also, if you can afford to do so, please consider going to our donate page and donate whatever you can. All we ask is that maybe you give us $5 a month, buy us a cup of coffee, a reoccurring $5 a month. Most of you who comment, you guys all support us, and we appreciate that. We could use a little more help here and there so that we can expand what we're doing with the show. Nobody here takes $1 of your donations home. Matter of fact, Charlie and I come out of pocket quite often every month to cover the difference, the shortfall. The show is literally supported by y'all. If we're worth preserving, that's the best way to show us you support it. Just help us out. This is a labor of love to our fellow man and our fellow citizens and to the truth. And in our case here on Fridays, the founding ideals of this country. Do with it what you will. You're your own individual. Make your own decisions, live your own life. We will see you. I don't know if Charlie's doing a show Monday. If you're a subscriber to Rumble, to the blog page, I don't know if he'll put anything up on the blog page, or to Facebook, you should get an announcement. Rumble's the best way to see that. Otherwise, just check it Sunday night, see if he's got a show scheduled. Otherwise, he says, Natasha says, I highly suggest donating directly to the Road to Concord rather than using Rumble. Yeah, if you donate through Rumble, we won't ever get that money. Rumble will keep it. Rumble's not giving us our share, revenue sharing. It's not a lot, but they're keeping it, and they won't answer our emails. So shame on you, Mr. Bongino. You're being very progressive there. You won't even answer your email. So that's why we put up a donate page. We can't trust the system to do what it tells us it's supposed to do. But anyway, we'll see you next Wednesday for sure. Worship Wednesday, Scripture. Going to start talking about Passover, the Last Supper, spring feasts, and how they work. We'll see you then. Y'all take care. Stay safe. We love all of you. Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.